You're all going to witness something that I've never done before. I woke up in another state this morning, and I am preaching in California. I woke up in Idaho this morning. Here I am in California. It's a crazy world we're living in. That's possible. But I'm also throwing that out there as an excuse if I'm slow, because I've been up since 3. I'm going to take you first off this morning to Genesis chapter 42. Genesis 42. And I have the page numbers in accordance with the Black Bibles in the pew. Genesis 42. To get it started, we're going to read these 3 verses together. But before we start, I do want to just let everyone know what's happening, what the context is. This is during the famine that happened in Egypt when Joseph became the number 2 guy in Egypt. And of course, he was the son that was sold into slavery. And then when God had interpreted the Pharaoh's dream through Joseph, Egypt became rich. They knew about the 7 years of plentifulness, and they stocked up, and they had more grain and corn and food than anybody else anywhere. And so that's one of the ways that God had used Joseph to deliver his people, his family. And so we're about to pick up right about that time. They're in the midst of this great famine, so there's hardly any food anywhere. And so verse 1 makes this statement. Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you looking one upon another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Go down there and buy for us from there, that we may live and not die." And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. So this is pretty simple. You know that what I really want to get out of this is actually pretty simple. Not gonna get some real deep meaning out of this text. The real simple thing I want to get out of this is, if you need something, you go get it. That's it. Need something, need some food, you find out where the food is. If I were to ask you, where do you get your groceries? You would all say the grocery market, right? Go down the road, depending on which one you like, Winco, Safeway, Rayleigh's, whatever. If you need groceries, you go to the grocery store. Where you get gas, the gas station. Where do you get spark plugs? Go to Craig Auto Parts. Well, it used to be Craig, it's O'Reilly now. Where do you get useless stuff that you don't really need? Target. Where do you get everything else? Amazon. But a pretty simple concept. If you need something, you go get it. We live in an era where in 21st century America, pretty simple, pretty easy for us. Was it always that way? Jacob and his sons, they had to go across the land, go down south into Egypt to get some food. It's not really that way for us anymore. My mentor, who was actually a World War II vet, and he moved west from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl era, during the Great Depression. Wasn't so simple for them in those days, but we're living in this golden era where, hey, if you want sushi, bam, go get it. Pretty simple. So, you want something, go get it. What if I ask you where do you get water? You go to the well. Thinking things like the faucet. Depends what you want to do with the water. Some water you don't want to drink. 2,000 years ago, if I were to ask you where you want to get water, where you go to get your water, rather, well, what if I ask you where you get your salvation? Frame the question this way: where do you go to get salvation? Go with me to John chapter 4. John chapter 4. We're going to take a look at the situation. It starts off as just another day for somebody, but it ends very different. The process of her day, the woman. Jesus is traveling around. He's begun his ministry. He's still pretty early in his ministry. Just a couple of chapters ago, he was in Jerusalem. The first time that we have recorded that he goes to the temple in his ministry. And that's when he cleanses the temple. He makes the whip and starts throwing tables over, and chases the sheep out of there because of the fact that the people were using it for their own gain, turning the house of God into a place of merchandise. But he's headed back north up into his homeland in Galilee. And it seems kind of strange the way it's recorded. I know I have verses 6 and 7 is what we're going to start, but take a look at verse 4 while we're in John chapter 4. Chapter 4 and verse 4, it says, he must needs go through Samaria. So there is some purpose for which Jesus wants to go through Samaria, which I'm going to make a few statements about Samaria in just a moment. But this was like a detour, it seemed, where Jesus would have gone another pathway originally, but now he's going through Samaria for a particular purpose. And we're going to take a look at that purpose today. So as he's moving up north, he's on foot, he and his disciples. In verses 6 and 7, let's read together. It says, now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being tired from the journey, sat thus on the well. And it was about the 6th hour of the day, which means it was about noon, which means the sun was beating down on him. Verse 7. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me something to drink. Stop right here. I just want to notice what's happening here. Like I said, we have this woman who is just living her day like any other day. Wasn't quite as convenient for her as it is for us. If you need water, you just go to the faucet, turn the nozzle, and you get water. Well, she had to make a trek. I don't know if she had to do it daily, but it was one of her tasks. And she's this woman who's just caring about with her everyday life. Jesus, however, is on a journey. I want you to just notice how he's tired. He's thirsty. I want to tell you right now, there might be some people here who have gone through experiences in their life, maybe like in the military, or maybe it was just some particular situation where they're on a long hike. I've been on hikes where my water filter either wasn't working or I couldn't find water. And when you actually experience thirst, it's it's horrible. It's a horrible. Eh, have you ever drank water that it was so good that you would pay extra moolah just to get some water? You know, because we take water for granted now. Like we really take it for granted. And it's really difficult for me to stand up here right now and try to just move the whole room into a position where we really stop and think about what it really means to be thirsty. Because I don't think I've ever actually really experienced thirst. Now that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, but it's one of those things where we can kind of miss the point when you don't know what it's like to be thirsty truly because of just the generation that we're living in right now. It's hard to really appreciate, but Jesus is thirsty right now. And he is able to use this opportunity to ask this woman for some water. Now we're going to read the next couple of verses. And I'm going to make a couple of statements about these verses as well. Verse 8 says, "For his disciples were gone away to the city to buy food." There's that point, you need something, go get it. Go to town, get some food. Verse 9, "Then said the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that you, being a Jew, have asked drink from me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans." Now I'm going to give you a brief history on the relations between the Jews and the Samaritans. Now, Samaria originally was just a part of Israel. The Jews had jurisdiction over Israel, it's a part of their land. During the time that the Babylonian Empire and before that, the Assyrian Empire came and conquered them, one of the things that the superpowers of the world that were conquering the world at the time did was they made these other places that they had conquered their provinces, right? And they just put their people there, the people who lived there. And there were still some Jews left over in Samaria. And so when he put his people into Samaria, what ended up happening was they would intermarry, and that was a big no-no for the Jews. And during that period of time, after the Jews were actually finally freed from their captivity from the Medo-Persian Empire, King Cyrus basically handed them a bag of gold and said, "Hey, you guys are free to go back to your hometown and go rebuild your temple because it was all destroyed. A lot of war and all the stuff that happened to them." So they finally, through prophetic writing, were able to go back home. They started to build their temple again. And guess who comes along and says, "Hey, let us help"? The Samaritans. Because the Samaritans are like, "Well, hey, we're kind of Jewish, We got a little bit of Jewish stuff going on." And you know what the Jews said? "Hit the road. We don't want you." Now, ever since that moment, there was massive racism between the two kinds of people. So they hated each other. They did not deal with each other. And it was such that, regardless of the fact that Jesus, in the middle of the day at noon, asks for water, the woman is confused by this. Like, right, you guys don't even talk to us. She was confused by the situation. So one of the things that this does is it kind of helps us to understand and realize that now that Jesus, remember, this is early in his ministry, as Jesus is moving in to his ministry, things are changing. Things are changing. It used to be all about the Hebrews. They used to think that they were what it's all about, so much to the point that this Samaritan woman is confused by the situation. I want to ask a question to get us started. Thinking about something. One of the reasons why I want to ask this question is because I kind of have a little bit of insight into the human mind. You know why I have insight into the human mind? Because I have a human mind. Good guess. In the front row. But I'm going to venture to guess that each of us, somewhere along the way in our life's journey, ends up feeling out of place when it comes to our relationship with God. I think often we also find ourselves not worthy of the grace of God, because I want to share a little something with you about my journey with God. The better I get to know God, the more I realize how unworthy I am. You have any idea how weird it is to handle the most precious and holy message of all, and to stand up here and to pretend like I know what I'm talking about every first day of the week? It ain't easy every time. Some days are easier than others. But we can go through moments in our lives, go through ups and downs in our journey where we have trouble even accepting the grace that God and Jesus have brought to us and given to us. And here in this story, we have a situation where a woman who, by the way, women were not looked at too fondly during this period of time. Women, in fact, were considered less than second-class citizens, really. And not only was she a woman, and this Jewish rabbi, this Jewish holy man, this man who was obviously something more than just some everyday Joe Jew, is actually having communication and talking to her. This is going to be something, because she's not just a woman, she's also a Samaritan on top of it. I'm going to turn over with you just a couple of pages, or just not even a couple of pages, just over to verses 17 and 18. Notice these couple of verses here. This is later on. There's a little dialogue that happens between this woman and Jesus. And notice what she does. Jesus offers her something, and then he makes this statement to her in verse 17. The woman answers and says, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to read verse 16 with it. Verse 16. Jesus says to her, go call your husband and come here. Verse 17, the woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you have well said that I have no husband. Verse 18, he says, for you have had 5 husbands. He whom you now have is not your husband. And that you have said true. It goes down even further, even deeper. The woman, she's a Samaritan. And just based off of the little bit of evidence here, she don't have her life together. Doesn't have things pieced together very well. I'm bringing this out to put ourselves in the story and making a realization of the fact that we struggle much of the time with the mercy and the grace of God. But I'm actually at a place where I'm wondering and thinking if we're putting God in our box. We're putting our expectation onto God and what we think God is going to accept and what God is going to allow. The truth is, there's not a single one of us who is worthy. Not a single one of us who is able to fathom the gloriousness of God. But in fact, Jesus tells us in verse 23, I want to read verse 23 with you now. As we're talking about different kinds of people and different kinds of feelings and understanding, verse 23, he makes this statement. The hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father, in spirit and in truth. Now, this last statement is what I really want us to focus on. The Father seeks such to worship him. As he's talking to this Samaritan woman who doesn't have her life together, he actually tells her, I want you to know something for real. God's looking for you. God's seeking people like you. God wants people like you. And I think our struggle is not having the faith in God's capacity to forgive whenever we don't realize that he, the God of heaven, is actually seeking for us to come to him. That's a huge deal. That means that when our perspective, when our feeling, our emotion is such that we are not allowing ourselves to be in line with what God truly wants, it says it right here clearly. Do you believe in what it says here, or are you going to be doubtful of what Jesus says? Do you trust your emotions more? No. I'm not worthy. What is it in me that God wants? It doesn't matter what you think about it. It just says right here, Jesus says, God's looking for people like you right now. So I don't know about you, but I think it makes more sense for us to love and trust and believe in what Jesus says here rather than our weak sauce emotions that come up that keeps us inhibited from being the creatures, the new creatures that God wants us to be. We hold ourselves back when it comes to that. That's like a self-inhibition, you know? Hey, that's not what it says in the Word. So whenever that feeling creeps up, man, you just shut that down. Let the Word of God speak through you in these kinds of situations. Let's keep on going, keep on reading. Got a couple of other verses here, 10 through 12. So remember now, the woman just said, so why are you talking to me? What is it about? You know the Jews and the Samaritans don't deal with each other. So this is Jesus' response. Jesus answered and said unto her, if you knew the gift of God, I just love that. That kind of moves me a little bit. If you knew, you know what I mean? If you only knew. Something about that. I mean, who is God? Really, something about. If you actually knew God, you know, realize you would fall on your face. If you knew. So if you didn't fall on your face, there's a reason why, because you don't really know the way you ought to know, probably. There's something to hiding it from you. But anyway, Jesus says, if you knew. Remember, this is a woman who is just on her way. You know, she's just kind of probably like humming tunes in her head. I got to get the stinking water again, right? This is just a normal day for her. Got to do the dishes, got to do the laundry. I ain't got no faucet like them spoiled 21st American people. I ain't got none of that. I got to go to a well to get my stuff. So maybe she's kind of complaining in her head, but this is just a normal day for her. And Jesus says, if you knew if you knew what was happening, like right in front of your very eyes right now, who you were talking to, kind of reminds me of the song. It's usually reserved just for the holiday season during Christmas time, but it's that Mary Did You Know? You guys ever Hear that song, Mary, Did You Know? And the whole premise of the song is, Mary, do you even realize what you got? Mary, do you realize who you hold in your belly? Mary, do you realize when you kiss your little baby, you kiss the face of God? Are you even aware of the fact of what you got? So Jesus is saying, if you only knew. So that's kind of one of our quests as Christians, right? To try to get to know all the more, every day, more and more, what we really got. You only knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, give me the drink. You would have asked him. He would have given you living water. Verse 11. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with. Well is deep. Where are you going to get this living water? You guys remember the first question as I was starting the lesson? Where are you going to go? You want groceries? Where do you go? Spark plugs? Where do you go? You want water? Where do you go? You go to the well. And that's what she is thinking right now. That's where her mind is. She's saying, well, there. Where do you plan on getting this water? I guess she still had this idea. I mean, I don't think she forgot her bucket. So is she going to tell Jesus, well, I'm not letting you borrow my bucket, you dirty, rotten Jew? You know? I don't know. I don't know what the deal is, but she's confused, right? Verse 12. Are you greater than our father Jacob? See, she claims Jacob, even though she's a Samaritan, she still claims Jacob, which gave us the well and drank thereof himself and his children and his cattle. So Jesus makes a really interesting statement. One she wasn't expecting. Who knows what she expected, but when she was already caught off guard by the fact that this Jew is even talking to her and wants her to draw some water for him, Jesus makes this very interesting statement. Tell you what, I'm not just some normal Jew. I'm not just a normal person. I'm not one of those people who subscribe to this ridiculous racism stuff. I'm not one of those people. I'm different. I got something. I got something that's better. If you knew who I was, and you could ask me, and I could give it to you. Now, the way she responds, what I want us to focus in on and see if we can develop something out of this. See if we can maybe understand a little bit of the piece of human that she is showing, she is displaying here, and see how we might be doing simple. Because, as you can see, she was not realizing what he was actually offering. So she related everything to just what she knows. Well, to get water, you need a bucket, and it's deep. And I'm not sure if she, in her own mind, was thinking that he wasn't welcome to this particular well, because she asked him, well, where are you going to go? Because I don't want you touching my well. I don't want you touching my town's well. But It's kind of like the old saying, right? The man is only a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. She wasn't able to understand and realize that he wasn't talking about this kind of water. She was thinking about the wrong kind of tool. She was thinking about the wrong kind of well. She had it all wrong. In other words, she had the wrong goal in mind. See, her goal when she got up that morning was to just live her life the way she had always lived her life. That was her goal. She didn't have it all together. We know that based off of the 5 husbands, and she's with a man that's not even her husband right now. Jesus points that out. He didn't hold it against her in any particular way, but he pointed it out. She's a Samaritan, and there's a lot of stuff going on in her life, I'm sure. But she was just a human doing human things. She had to get stuff done, so she had to go to the well to get some water. And she ran into something that was going to totally change her whole outlook on life, something that was going to make a massive shift in her perception of what her goal now should be, because her goal was all about how to get a water out of a well, and he is now shifting it to a whole new type of goal, which is something way more she could have ever possibly imagined. We ever do the same kind of thing? I mean, what's your goal in life, really, when you stop and think about it? It's kind of the way we can apply this. Because, a lot of people just ain't happy these days. A lot of people will be going through stuff like emotional issues, emotional struggles. A lot of people are going through situations where they don't feel like they have everything, don't have what this isn't the way it should have been. This isn't the way I wanted it to be. It's not the way I thought it was gonna be. It's not the life that I envisioned for myself. Because I'm pretty sure not many girls, while they're prancing around in princess costumes when they're 5, 6, 7 years old, think, I can't wait for husband number 6. Pretty sure that's not what she had in mind. So when she woke up in the morning, she was probably thinking, this isn't what I anticipated. I don't feel so good. But ain't nobody here ever felt like that, though, right? You got it all together. Ain't nobody here ever thought, when you wake up in the morning, oh, sweet mercy, again? Right? Of course we do. We wake up, and sometimes it doesn't even matter how good things might be. We come up with things that ain't right. And you got this wonderful thing called age. And even though I got the woman of my dreams and I got all the good stuff, my knee don't feel the way it did like when I was in my 20s. We humans are real creative. We can come up with all kinds of stuff to complain about. Jesus, how are you gonna reach your goal? You don't have a bucket. Just thinking about it all wrong. Now I asked you a question in the beginning of the lesson, right? You want groceries, you go to the grocery market. You want spark plugs, you go to Cragen. You want useless garbage, you go to Target. You want peace? You want peace? You don't go to Facebook to find peace. That's the wrong bucket. Okay? You You want to add something to your life? You don't go to Instagram to find something for your life. Now, the marketer's got you fooled. And again, you don't go to Amazon. You don't go to, you don't even go to other people. In fact, I asked you the wrong question in the beginning. Where do you go to get salvation? It's not where do you go. Who do you go to? Let's reread verse 10. Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who, see that? If you knew the gift of God and who, it's what the word says. If you knew who was standing right in front of you, you wouldn't be worried about this water, and you wouldn't be worried about the dishes. I mean, things got to be done still. That's not the point of the lesson. When they said, don't worry about the dishes, man, start piling up. Now, you still got to take care of stuff. Oh, I was going to say something, but I'm not getting in trouble. You have no idea that how much to hold back sometimes because I don't want to get in trouble. But that's okay. Man, if you knew the gift of God and you knew who was right in front of you, well, I'm telling you, your whole perspective would be changing. You won't be worried about this other kind of stuff. You won't be worried about all that. And if you are so worried about it, then your goals are wrong. You're thinking about it all wrong. You know the word says that if you seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then you'll have all the food you need and you have the clothes on your back. You know the word actually says that? What else do you need? But the world is playing games with our mind, playing games with our head. Even though this life isn't exactly what you thought it was supposed to be or what you wanted, or it's not as easy as you thought it would be, or there's not as many zeros in the bank account as you were hoping you would have made it to, or your vacations aren't as lavish as you wanted them to be, or you're having whatever the situation is, even though that all might be true, who cares if you got Jesus? These goals distract us from what's really important. I'm telling you right now, when the word says that what is this life, it is nothing but a vapor that appears for a short time and quickly vanishes away. But it just poof, it's gone. You're not going to be worried about any of that stuff that causes the emotional difficulties. You're worried about that kind of stuff. Because one day, you're going to be looking at eternity. Everything that's going on down here, it's like that well. Verse 5. Oh, sorry, not verse 5. Okay. Verse 13. John 4:13. Jesus answers and said, whoever drinks this water shall thirst again. The water that was her goal, it was a temporary goal. Once it's gone, you're unfulfilled again. Once it's gone, you need more again. Not so with eternity. Not so with the goals that God has laid before us. Look a few pages over. Jesus tried so bad. It's one of those interesting mysteries. I mean, because you stop and think about it. Who who better to try to teach and preach? Jesus didn't try to do anything. He succeeded in everything that he set out to do. God. I tell you, it can be a struggle. I remember when I was like 18, 19, 20 years old and I was training for ministry. I had this idea, I had this thought in my head that I knew everything. And I still get that way every now and then. But I used to have like this thought that one day, not one day, but everyone who I came into contact with or I came across with, I could explain the gospel in a way that they would hear it, they would listen, they would accept it. I don't know how I even got that idea in my head. I was in the midst of training for ministry. I thought I would be able to do it in a better way than anybody. And here we have Jesus, the Son of God, who knows all and who created all and is God in the flesh and all these things, and and can even know all of our thoughts. And here we have him preaching to people, and they just walk away. Just sort of walk away, like, you gotta be kidding me. He obviously wasn't tricking anybody because, if he was trying to trick anybody into listening, he probably could have gotten more people, but he wanted genuine, honest people. People who believed in him because he was Jesus, because they had a heart to believe, not because it was popular. And here in chapter 6 that we're taking a look at right now, John chapter 6, he feeds 5,000 people. And guess what that did? Got a whole lot of people saying, hey, I kind of like this Jesus guy. Giving us food. Pretty sweet. Using methods other than the word itself. Not that, obviously it's not wrong to do that because Jesus did it, right? So, in the situation, Jesus separates himself from the big group of people. And they're all looking for him. And this is between this, he ends up walking on the sea and all that kind of stuff. And then they finally find him again because they're confused the way it was. It's like, well, you didn't get on a boat. How did you get over here? Anyway, whatever. Jesus, where you been? And Jesus actually looks at them and says, well, you guys aren't really looking for me because of the words that I preach and because you believe, but you're looking for me because I fed you. And then he starts preaching to them, and he starts preaching to them with some methods that started making everyone feel uncomfortable. Saying things, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And it says, I am the bread of life. And the way he was preaching it, they didn't like it. Whoa. You just feed us. Basically, just shut up and feed us, okay? I don't want to hear what you have to say. And in the midst of all that, they left. They weren't being entertained. They weren't getting the food. It was making them start to feel uncomfortable. I don't know if you realize and understand this. The gospel makes you feel uncomfortable. The word of God makes us feel uncomfortable. That's okay. And so he turns to his people, to his disciples. And he asks them a question. So let's read this. I might have to speak. Let's begin at verse 66. From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. I'm telling you, that would be so uncomfortable. I mean, it's like what Jesus said to the Samaritan woman at the well, right? If you only knew who I was, right? Can you imagine being that crowd of people on the judgment day when they have to look at God? And God says, do you realize what you did? You walked away from him. You had your chance. This is not This is not something you want on your resume. I walked away from Jesus as he was preaching to him because he didn't feed me enough. That's not something you want on your resume, yeah? It's also super uncomfortable to be like, oh, I was preaching a message and like half the group here got, said, I don't like this guy. I don't like the way he preaches. And this guy walked away. I'd be like, well, why are you leaving? What did I say? What did I do? It's hard not to feel that way sometimes, I'm still telling myself, a lot of people are here because of the rain. It wasn't me, right? I hope it wasn't me. I hope it was the rain, But hey, I'm trying to preach the word. If that ain't enough, then I guess that's the whole situation that we're reading about right now. People walked away from Jesus. People are gonna walk away from me too while I'm preaching. Jesus, verse 67, turns to the 12 and says, "You also go away." Verse 68, Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." And it's not about where you go, it's about who you go to. Go to the Son of God. You don't go to Dave. You don't go to any other person. Remember the bucket. If your goals are wrong, the goals aren't set according to spiritual things, you're going to look for the wrong means. You're going to look for the wrong things. You're going to look for the wrong kind of people. Then none of that matters if the words of life are being spoken. That's what is really going to matter. Are the words of life being spoken? None of the other stuff matters. So you got to know what you want. You got to know what you really ought to be thirsty for. I'm going to skip the next verse. The next verse, actually, I'll paraphrase it for you. It's a statement Jesus makes in Luke 17, verse 21, when he says, we're not going to say, look over here or over there for the kingdom. Behold, the kingdom is within you. It's not about where you go, but the fact that the kingdom is within you is about who you go to and who is within you. And then, I want you to take a look at Matthew 7 and verse 7. This is in the Sermon on the Mount. Even as an isolated verse without really a context, it stands pretty well on its own. The context is Jesus preaching the Sermon on the Mount. He's just turning the whole world upside down. Everything you thought was true ain't so much. The way we humans perceive the world is not the way God teaches us to view the world. And the Sermon on the Mount, as he is starting to move toward a conclusion, he's starting to call for an action for the people in the audience. And he makes this statement: ask, and it shall be given. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. What I want to say about this verse right now is a takeaway that I want you to walk away with and pray about and meditate upon. And it's, make sure you know what you're asking for. Make sure you know what you're seeking. Make sure you know what you want. We have hidden desires that we don't like to admit to ourselves. I don't really want the truth. I really just want to be comfortable. You can apply this secular or spiritual. Of course, spiritual is the by far the vastly most important. But on a secular level, if everyone says they want to be healthy, but You really want healthy, you want that burrito. You know what I mean? And I ain't got nothing against burritos. Love burritos. But what do you really want more is the question. And so whenever we take a look at the spiritual side of things, now this woman, her goal was about water so she could get the dishes done. Jesus was trying to help her understand now, you got to make yourself and set yourself a goal to get the living water. And just a page back to Matthew chapter 5 and verse 6. Right here in the midst of what we refer to as the Beatitudes. This is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, they shall be filled." So, I'm going to end the lesson with this question. What do you really want? What are you really thirsty for? Which well will you go to? The well of life? Or are your goals really about the well that's hanging around down here? Really stop and think about what you really want. That changes everything. So while we think about that, we can sing about how praiseworthy God is that Jesus came down here to teach us this stuff, teach us these lessons. So while you ponder these things, find yourself in need, and you are invited to come forth as